Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. He's dead weight. Honestly, kissing him is like forcing your tongue into a block of ice. It actually makes me gag. The words didn't just hang in the air. They severed the final thread of Julian's patience like a guillotine blade dropping through the silence of the corridor. Julian stood frozen in the shadow of a marble pillar, the crystal flute of champagne in his hand trembling not from sorrow, but from a cold, waking rage. He wasn't supposed to be here, in the secluded VIP smoking terrace of the Grand Hotel. He was supposed to be in the ballroom, accepting congratulations for his engagement to the man who was currently laughing about his lack of bedroom skills. But the laughter of the entourage wasn't what made Julian's blood run cold. It was the lie, the sheer, audacious fabrication of it. Because in the 3 years they had been together, Adrian had never kissed him. Not once. Julian took a step back, the expensive Italian leather of his shoes silent against the plush carpet. He looked at his reflection in a darkened window pane. He saw a man composed of neutral colors, beige suit, chestnut hair neatly parted, an expression of perpetual, polite accommodation. He was Julian Valerius, the brilliant but boring architect behind the Valcorp empire. The quiet genius who let the charismatic Adrian take all the credit. He had played the part of the demure, waiting fiancé perfectly, believing Adrian's excuses about respecting tradition and waiting for the wedding night. Whatever shattered inside Julian in that moment didn't make a sound. It was a structural failure, a controlled demolition of the man he used to be. Pathetic, isn't it? The voice came from the deeper shadows of the balcony. A baritone so deep it vibrated through Julian's chest. Julian didn't jump. He simply turned his head, his eyes adjusting to the gloom to find a figure leaning against the stone railing. Silas Kane, the viper of the architectural world, the CEO of Kane Dynamics and the sworn enemy of Julian's family. Silas stepped into the sliver of moonlight. He was a masterpiece of sharp angles and predatory grace, dressed in a tuxedo of midnight blue velvet that absorbed the light. His eyes, the color of stormy seas, were fixed on Julian with an intensity that felt like a physical touch. "You heard," Julian said, his voice flat. "I heard a mediocre man lying to impress a group of sycophants," Silas replied, taking a slow drag from a cigarette before flicking it over the balcony. He moved closer, towering over Julian. "But the interesting part isn't the lie, Julian. It's the fact that you're standing here, clutching that glass like you want to murder someone, instead of crying in the bathroom." "I don't cry over bad investments," Julian said, surprising himself. "I liquidate them." A slow, terrifying smile spread across Silas's face. It was the smile of a wolf watching a sheep sharpen its teeth. "Liquidation. I like that. But Adrian holds the contract on your latest designs, doesn't he? The Sky Garden project. If you leave him, you lose your masterpiece. You lose your reputation. You lose everything." Julian's grip on the glass tightened until his knuckles turned white. It was true. The Valerius and Valcorp merger was contingent on the marriage. If Julian walked away, his parents would disown him, and Adrian would keep the intellectual property rights to 3 years of Julian's work. He was trapped. "He thinks I'm boring," Julian whispered, the absurdity of it clawing at his throat. "He thinks I'm a distinct lack of flavor because I tailored myself to fit his palate." "I never found you boring," Silas murmured, stepping into Julian's personal space. The scent of sandalwood and rain clung to him. "I found you. Restrained. Like a cathedral hidden behind scaffolding. I've been trying to poach you for 5 years, Julian. Not just for your designs." Julian looked up, meeting the gaze of the man he was supposed to hate. "And what would you do, Silas? If you were in my position?" "I wouldn't be in your position," Silas said softly. "But if I were you, I wouldn't just leave. I would burn his house down while he was still inside, and I would look good doing it." Silas extended a hand, large and scarred on the palm. "Come with me. Kane Dynamics needs a lead architect. I'll buy out your contract. I'll bury Valcorp in litigation so deep they won't see sunlight for a decade. I will give you the world, Julian, just to see you break it." "Why?" Julian asked, his heart hammering against his ribs, a rhythm of adrenaline he hadn't felt in years. "Why help me?" "Because," Silas leaned down, his lips brushing the shell of Julian's ear, sending a shiver down his spine that had nothing to do with the cold. I want to know if the rumor is true. I want to know if you really make men gag, or if you make them beg. The challenge hung in the air, electric and dangerous. Julian looked at the hand offered to him. It was a deal with the devil. It was social suicide. It was the end of his safe, beige life. Julian placed his hand in Silas's. Let's go back inside. I have an engagement to break. The ballroom was a sea of diamonds and designer silk, a suffocating display of wealth. The orchestra played a waltz, oblivious to the violence about to unfold. Adrian was holding court near the center fountain, looking flushed and victorious, surrounded by the same group of men from the balcony. When the double doors swung open, the room didn't go silent immediately. It was a ripple effect. Heads turned, whispers started, and then a hush fell over the crowd like a heavy blanket. Julian walked in, but it wasn't the Julian they knew. He had discarded his tie. The top 2 buttons of his shirt were undone, exposing the pale column of his throat. His hair, usually gelled flat, had been roughed up by the wind, or perhaps by a hand. But the most shocking accessory was the man walking beside him, a hand possessively placed on the small of Julian's back. Silas Kane steered Julian through the crowd like a dreadnought parting the waves. The air around them crackled. People parted, eyes widening. The enemy was inside the gates, and he was holding the groom. Adrian turned, his smile faltering as he saw them. He blinked, confused, then laughed nervously. Julian? What is this? Why is he here? They stopped 3 feet from Adrian. The proximity was suffocating. Silas is my new partner, Julian said, his voice projecting clearly over the silent music. He didn't sound shy. He didn't sound demure. He sounded like steel. Partner, Adrian scoffed, looking around for support from his friends. Business partner? You can't work for him, Julian. You signed a non-compete. You belong to Valcorp. You belong to me. I read the contract, Adrian, Julian said, taking a step forward. Clause 14, Section B. The non-compete is void if the engagement is terminated due to infidelity or gross public disparagement. My lawyers are filing the motion as we speak. I believe gagging counts as disparagement. Adrian's face drained of color. The friends behind him shuffled awkwardly. You were listening. Every word, Julian confirmed. Baby, listen, Adrian stammered, stepping forward, reaching for Julian's arm. It was just guy talk. Locker room talk. You know I love you. You know how much I respect our purity. I was just trying to fit in. Don't throw away 3 years over a joke. Silas moved. It was a blur of motion. Before Adrian's hand could graze Julian's sleeve, Silas caught Adrian's wrist. He didn't twist it. He just held it, his grip absolute. Touch him, Silas said, his voice a low growl that vibrated through the floorboards, and you will lose the hand. Adrian flinched, pulling back, rubbing his wrist. He tried to regain his composure, sneering. Fine. Go with him. He's a monster anyway. You deserve each other. You're frigid, Julian. Everyone knows it. I've been a saint putting up with your coldness for this long. Enjoy him, Kane. He's about as exciting as a spreadsheet. Julian laughed. It was a dark, rich sound that shocked even himself. You called me boring, Julian said, tilting his head. You said kissing me makes you gag. Julian turned to Silas. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't hesitate. He reached up, tangling his fingers into Silas's dark hair, and pulled the taller man down. Silas didn't just accept the kiss, he devoured it. He wrapped an arm around Julian's waist, lifting him off his feet, crushing him against his chest. It wasn't a chaste, tentative peck. It was a claiming. It was wet, hot, and devastatingly passionate. Julian opened his mouth, meeting Silas's intensity with a starvation born of 3 years of neglect. The chemistry between them was nuclear, a visible shockwave that stunned the room. For 10 seconds, the world didn't exist. There was only the taste of whiskey and smoke on Silas's tongue, the heat of his body, the absolute, undeniable reality of being wanted. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, lips swollen and red, Julian kept his eyes locked on Silas, but he spoke to Adrian. Wait, Julian whispered, feigning shock, running a thumb over his bruised lip. We never kissed once, did we, Adrian? So how would you know? The gasp from the crowd was audible. The implication was clear. Adrian had been exposed not just as a liar, but as a fraud who had failed to secure the one thing he claimed to reject. Adrian stood open-mouthed, humiliated, as the whispers turned into laughter directed at him. Silas smirked, wiping a trace of saliva from his lip with his thumb. He looked at Adrian with cold amusement. "You were right about one thing, Valerius. He definitely doesn't make me gag." Silas turned Julian around, keeping a heavy arm around his shoulders. "Come on, architect. We have an empire to build, and I have a lot of lost time to make up for." The weeks that followed were a blur of high-stakes corporate warfare and a domestic intimacy that terrified Julian more than any lawsuit. Silas made good on his threats. Valcorp was bleeding money. Kane Dynamics had announced the Obsidian Tower, a project that defied physics, spearheaded by their new chief architect, Julian Valerius. But it was the nights that confused Julian. He was living in Silas's penthouse, for security reasons, Silas claimed, though the security was mostly Silas himself glaring at anyone who looked at Julian too long. It was late. The city lights of Seoul sprawled out beneath the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse study. Julian was hunched over a drafting table, sleeves rolled up, sketching furiously. He felt the presence before he heard it. Silas placed a mug of steaming tea on the desk. "You've been staring at that elevation for 4 hours," Silas said, leaning against the edge of the desk. He was wearing loose lounge pants and a black t-shirt that clung to his broad shoulders, a domestic look that made Julian's mouth go dry every time. "It's not right," Julian muttered, rubbing his eyes. "The structural integrity of the spire. It's too aggressive. It needs to be softer." "It's perfect," Silas corrected him. "It's sharp. It pierces the sky. It's unapologetic. Just like you." Julian put the pencil down. "I'm not unapologetic, Silas. I'm terrified. Adrian is countersuing. My parents are calling the press every day, calling me a whore. And I'm living in the house of a man I barely know, pretending to be his lover." Silas went still. "Pretending?" Julian looked up. "Aren't we?" It was a show. For the gala. To humiliate Adrian. Silas moved around the desk. He took Julian's chin in his hand, tilting his face up. The playful arrogance was gone, replaced by a raw vulnerability that Julian hadn't seen before. "Julian," Silas said, his voice rough. "I don't play games with my life. I don't let people into my home. I don't let people touch my hair. And I certainly don't kiss people to make a point." "Then what was it?" Julian breathed. "It was an interview," Silas whispered, his thumb tracing Julian's lower lip. "And you got the job." "You're impossible," Julian managed to say, though his heart was racing. "You're a predator." "I'm a collector of rare things," Silas corrected. "And I finally have the centerpiece of my collection." "I'm not an object, Silas." "No, you're the artist. I'm just the canvas." Silas leaned in closer. Adrian was a fool. He had a galaxy in his hands, and he treated it like a rock. "I intend to worship every star." Julian felt the wall behind his emotions crumble. For 3 years, he had starved for affection, convinced he was unworthy of it, convinced he was too boring to be loved passionately. "I don't know how to do this," Julian admitted, his voice trembling. "I don't know how to be the person you see. I'm just Julian. That's all I want," Silas said. He lifted Julian out of the chair, setting him on the edge of the desk, stepping between his knees. "I don't want the perfect fiancé. I want the brilliant, angry, messy architect who draws until 3 a.m. and drinks too much coffee. I want the man who looked me in the eye and told me to burn the world down." Silas kissed him then, slow and deep. It wasn't the showy kiss from the ballroom. It was tender, possessive, and terrifyingly real. It tasted of tea and promise. Julian wrapped his arms around Silas's neck, pulling him closer, burying his hands in that thick, dark hair. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel like he was performing. He didn't feel boring. He felt electric. The day of the Architectural Digest Awards was the final battlefield. Adrian had arrived with a new fiancée, a young model who looked terrified. He was trying to project confidence, but the bags under his eyes told a different story. Valcorp's stock had plummeted. The industry knew who the real talent had been all along. Julian walked the red carpet in a suit of crushed velvet, a deep burgundy that contrasted sharply with Silas's black attire. They moved as a unit. When they reached the podium to accept the award for Visionary Design of the Year, the room was silent. Julian took the microphone. He looked out at the sea of faces, the people who had whispered about him, the parents who had disowned him, and the ex-fiancée who had belittled him. Architecture is about honesty, Julian said, his voice steady. You cannot build a skyscraper on a foundation of lies. It will collapse. I spent years trying to build a life on a foundation that didn't exist. I was told I was too plain, too boring, too muted. He looked at Silas, who was standing a few feet away, watching him with blatant pride. But I learned that sometimes, Julian continued, turning back to the crowd, his eyes locking onto Adrian's. You just need the right lighting to see the cracks in the facade. And sometimes, you need a wrecking ball to clear the way for something magnificent. The applause was polite at first, then raucous. As they left the stage, Adrian intercepted them in the wings. He looked disheveled, desperate. Julian, Adrian hissed, grabbing Julian's elbow. This has gone far enough. You've made your point. Come home. The firm is falling apart without you. I am falling apart. Julian looked at the hand on his arm. It felt like a ghost touching him. Nothing. No fear, no anger, no love. Just nothing. That sounds like a structural problem, Adrian, Julian said calmly. I suggest you hire a contractor. You belong to me. Adrian shouted, his facade cracking. You're nothing without me. You're just a... Silas stepped forward, his shadow engulfing Adrian. He didn't speak. He just stared. The menace radiating from him was palpable, a physical weight in the narrow hallway. Adrian released Julian's arm as if it were red-hot iron. He stumbled back, cowed by the sheer dominance of the man standing beside his ex. We're done here, Silas said quietly. They walked out the back exit, into the cool night air. The limo was waiting. Inside the car, the silence was comfortable. Silas poured 2 glasses of whiskey. He handed one to Julian. You were ruthless back there, Silas noted, clinking his glass against Julian's. I had a good teacher, Julian smiled, taking a sip. The burn of the alcohol was pleasant. So, Silas asked, loosening his tie. The boring architect. The dead fish. Is he gone? Julian set his glass down. He climbed over the center console, straddling Silas's lap, pressing him back into the leather seat. He saw the surprise in Silas's eyes, followed quickly by dark, molten heat. I don't know, Julian whispered, leaning down to bite gently at Silas's jawline. Why don't you check my pulse and tell me? Silas groaned, his hands gripping Julian's hips, anchoring him. Your pulse is racing, Julian. Good, Julian murmured against his lips. Because I'm just getting started. And that is how the viper tamed the wolf. Or perhaps, how the architect finally designed his own destiny. If you enjoyed seeing Julian take control and shatter his ex's ego, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you forgive a husband who tried to kill your reputation, or would you burn his empire to the ground? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then, prompt image. Prompt, masterpiece, best quality, high-res, 1.2. Korean manhwa style, semi-realistic, digital art. 2 men, BL, Yaoi, man 1. Julian, handsome architect, brown hair slightly messy, wearing burgundy velvet suit, unbuttoned collar, expression of confident defiance, holding a microphone. Man 2. Silas, tall intimidating CEO, black hair, sharp blue eyes, wearing black tuxedo, standing protectively behind Julian, hand on Julian's waist, glaring at camera with possessive intensity. Background is a blurred luxury awards gala stage with spotlights and gold confetti falling, cinematic lighting, dramatic atmosphere, intricate details, sharp focus.